with the internet connection, and there we go. We're live.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome
to
I Need Living Conversations. This is the first time we're transmitting live now from StreamYard into our free channels. It's in YouTube. Aloha, I Need Thou Living. Then onto Facebook, which is called Owl Freedom Nation. We're waiting for Facebook. And on Rumble also, I Need Thou Living. This is the 71st conversation I have with real Heron women. And we are on the third part of the ontogenic basis of you. So how you doing?
I am fabulous. It's a nice winter evening here in Oklahoma to talk about embryology, to continue on with embryology. So let me before you continue, maybe I'll do a little recapitulation. Yeah.
And I don't want to say something technical, really, or some type of summarization of what has happened. Rather, I wanted to exercise where I was thinking about this. And I thought I'm gonna say what I have learned from these two lessons, right? And one of the things that I have learned from these teachings are let me see if I put the volume down. Maybe this. Yeah, while I'm speaking, it's really disturbing. Okay. I've learned a lot from these teachings, and you know, spiritual teachings resonate. So there are things that you're seeing in different places, right? It's not like you can say this is it's here where I learned it from, because it's resonating in different places, and it comes to you in different places. So one of the things that is resonating for me a lot is how it's this waking up even more. It's amazing that after 20 years you continue to just make your consciousness more congruent and more, and you really touch down on the earth, right? And you become more conscious of the fact that we've been living in a mindset that denies our own ontogenic nature.
Yeah.
That denies the fact that we have it all in us to overcome all of the problems on the earth, right? But it's so amazing how far from that we've been raised in, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's how alien we are to our own nature, to our own biology, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So these teachings you've been giving, even if they're technical, they resonate this whole thing to me, where they really start bringing me down and realizing how badly the teaching that's out there, the mindset that's out there is that things that we are unable to overcome are problems as humanity, that is just normal, that's the future, that's the only way it is, that's civilization,
yeah,
and all that's wrong. And it only takes, I love your phrase, it takes about 5 minutes to come into congruence and realize, wait a minute, I can change everything right now if I change myself, if I change my plans, if I change my mindset, if I change how I identify myself, if I change all of that, everything in me, I can put myself in tune with my own, with myself. That's the thing. We're just out of tune with ourselves. So far out of tune with ourselves. So this is what I've been resonating. This is what I've been learning. And this is what I think this is really about. Core, but it's really important to have the technical explanation what you're going to continue doing on how the embryo evolves, how cells really evolve. You've talked about how the genetics is not the all there is is not what defines the evolution. It's only part of the structure, and it's even fields of energy decide what type of cell it evolves and so forth.
It's not evolution. We're not evolving to a higher form. We're developing.
There you go. That's another thing. So please continue. Yes.
So, and on that note, I'd like to add from when we talked about the dimensions, the dimension where you can really shapeshift. I think it was the holistic dimension. Our shamanic ancestors that knew how to shapeshift, that literally could shape themselves into an eagle or a jaguar, literally. That takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of energy. And because we are shaped, as I have been telling over and over and over in this ontogenic basis of you, we will always grow a human body. Always, always, always. Because we are shaped to grow a human body. When we do all this work to shapeshift ourselves into a jaguar or an eagle or a monkey or whatever you're going to shapeshift yourself into, you can only hold it for a short amount of time because the morphologic fields will always settle at the lowest amount of energy needed to hold together the form, which is your human form.
Right.
So
then that's pretty. We've been, I think, kind of awed by communism and all these powers of shape. And we need to realize that there's more important things.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a time and a place for shape-shifting, literally shape-shifting your body now. And we'll talk, we can spend a whole nother time talking about shape-shifting and how many different ways we can actually shape-shift things. But for tonight, let's get back into the fields. We did 6 last time of the fields that form us. So field number 7 is called a dilation field. This looks like pulling apart an extendable structure, like taking a pocket door or an accordion door, so to speak, and pulling it apart. That's what a dilation field is. And note that the word is dilation, not dilatation, because dilatation is a purely mechanical connotation. And there is no such thing as a purely mechanical process in the human body.
Okay.
Biomechanical attraction arises from work performed by the living cells and their cellular ensembles. So we can actually describe this work as an achievement or performance of the whole embryo. So actual biological processes are always more than purely physical events. So in dilation fields, the living inner tissue cells become extended and the lined in bundles or sheets. These become muscle fibers. So in a developmentally dynamic sense, the gradual extension of muscle cells is a passive event. Initially, muscles are always the more passive component of the organs of movement, and they are our organs of movement. On the other hand, the young cartilage provides an active piston-like function, which I talked briefly for 5 seconds about last week. So this piston-like function drags the adjacent cells into form, so to speak. So if the precursors of muscle cells were not first extended, they would never be able to shorten when active. So again, this is a reversal between embryonic growth function and adult function. So first they have to be lengthened so that they can shorten when they're active.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So even though adult muscles are capable of extension, all natural muscular actions begin with a slight extension of the muscle prior to shortening. So muscles always arise wherever there exists both a biophysical cause, which is tensile stress, and a spatial opportunity, so a space for muscles. So there's stress and a space that causes muscle cells or muscle masses. On the other hand, tendons arise wherever transverse growth is impossible. They can't go sideways. So there's lateral tension. There's tension coming from the sideways. So that's where tendons arise. So, for example, everywhere that inner tissue becomes sandwiched between the skin and the broadening articulation segment of a developing skeleton, so the head of a bone, that's the articulation segment, wherever the inner tissue becomes sandwiched between the skin and the bone is where tendons arise.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
So field number 8 then is called a detraction field. This is like pulling, imagine you have two sticky boards stuck together and one person's pulling it from one way and the other person's pulling it from the other direction. So it's the sticky glue and the supports are dragged, creating slippage so that water is pushed out. So this is another field of creating bones. And this applies to bone formation in the matrix of connective tissue and cartilage. So we have the ones where the water's dripping out and right, like through a sieve, and then we have the detraction where it's slipped apart, where water is squeezed out. So those are the fields. Those are the 8 fields that develop us. So let's talk about our developing nervous system. Well, the word system implies something contained or delineated. However, the truth is that there is no sharp boundary between structures and organs that are usually described as nervous and other parts of the embryo. So since we develop from one fertilized ovum, it's absolutely impossible to say when the first nervous cell arises. So we can't say where the nervous system begins and ends, and that's true of all, quote, systems. So here's the problem with everyone that's shifting to system thinking. They're still thinking in the same old mode. Just because they're shifting to system thinking, there's never, in nature, there's nothing, as in our bodies, there's no sharp boundary that determines a system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
right? So the first part of it is the neural tube, which encases our spinal cord, and the spinal cord arises from that. And then there's the neurons and the dendrites and the axons and all that. But no organ could exist that is functionless during its development. So the nervous system is an organ, and it's functioning already during its development. The nervous system achieves its subsequent performances on account of its previous growth functions. So there's always a growth function that precedes. And as with all the other organs of our body, our nervous system develops in a dynamic way according to its positional relationship with the neighboring structures. Relationships for the neural tube, the spinal cord, are already evident in a 2 millimeter long embryo. So this tiny already has the neural tube. So in anatomy, there's a principle called encapsis or encaptic division. This principle states that the parts are similar to the whole. So when applied to the brain, it would mean that what is valid for the brain as a whole also applies to its individual cells, which are the nerve cells. Mm-hmm. So a mature nerve cell or neuron has a form similarity to a form that is similar to the entire central nervous system of the brain and spinal cord. So a single neuron mirrors the entire spinal cord and brain. Our peripheral nerves arise in definite number and definite sequence. The first nerves to develop are what we call the cranial nerves. There's 12 of them, and then the spinal nerves. All cranial and spinal nerves are present in an embryo when it is 28 days old and 4.2 millimeters long. So not even an inch long, and all our cranial and spinal nerves are already there.
Wow.
These nerves develop according to the generally valid rule that for particular differentiation to occur, there must exist a spatial opportunity, a space, and a direct cause for the differentiation. So the pathway for
what would the direct cause be?
The direct cause for differentiation would be just that they need to form, right?
Okay.
Not that we need nerves to stimulate us; they just need to form.
Okay.
The pathway for nerve fibers is prescribed by the organs to be innervated. So the brain doesn't describe the pathways. It's the organs that have nerve fibers in them that have, and all of our organs are innervated by nerves, every single one of them. So our muscles become innervated in the embryo because there exists both the spatial opportunity and the dynamic occasion for their innervation, not because we need them to be innervated. There's just the space, the spatial opportunity, and the dynamic occasion. So the very growth of neuronal pathways is already an early nervous activity. So from the nerves, and that was just a really general overview because it's a lot to even begin to pull apart how the nervous system and the embryo develops. I just gave as brief and general of an overview as I could. So we'll go into the organs of movement next, which are our nerves. So our muscles. So for almost 2,000 years, we have interpreted muscles as the active agents of body movements and the skeleton as the passive supporting component. It's actually true for the later stages of our human development. However, as I've been pointing out in the last two sections, the performance for us adults, the performances we do are all based on early growth functions, and that each growth function is preceded by a unique developmental function. So when investigating the skeleton and musculature from their early functions, we find that the muscles arise in dilation fields. So they function passively under stretch already. They're already being stretched. Before muscles can be contracted, they must first be dilated. They must first be stretched. So the developing cartilaginous skeleton functions initially as the active part of the movement apparatus. So it's the growing skeleton that's the movement, the organ of movement. So our adult skeleton consists of the skeletal components of our heads, our trunk, and our limbs. And our axial skeleton includes the skull, the hyoid bone, which is right here. It's a free-floating bone in our neck. The vertebral column, the ribs, and the sternum. That's our axial. That's our central axis skeleton.
Okay.
In the embryo, the limbs are already segmenting before the skeleton and musculature have developed. So we're already developing limbs before the skeleton is developing. So already, by the start of the second month of development, the tiny arm and leg blueprints are expressing growth functions in the sense of grasping and stepping movements. So genetic information alone is quite insufficient to explain muscle phenogenesis. So again, the DNA, the genes are not the drivers of muscle phenogenesis.
Okay.
And what is absolutely remarkable is that our body has only a finite number of muscles at its disposal to accomplish its immense variety of arbitrary movements, gymnastic skills, and manual dexterity that we have. So fundamentally, there are no differences between the organs of movement in the head, the trunk, and the limbs, which would be the muscles, or initially the skeleton and then the muscles. And as we've seen, head development takes precedence in the development of the human embryo. Liver is directly subservient to the heart. The heart, in turn, is responsible for supplying blood to the brain, and so it is subordinate to the brain. It is therefore apparent that the capacity both to regulate and be regulated is a fundamental phenomenon of development. Instead of a pump, it's better to think of the heart as actually a switch that reverses the direction and momentum of the blood between inflow and outflow.
Yeah. Or a regulator?
Yeah, it could be a regulator too. Regulating switch, yeah. Whatever, so whatever, something like that. So as we talked about, what?
It's definitely not a pump.
It's not a pump.
We know it.
Well, we should know it.
Yeah. So as we talked about last week, the polarity of the assimilation pole, as assimilation pole ascends and the impansion pit descends, right? So the brain ascends and the viscera descend in very well-defined movements. The viscera are our intestines, the lungs, all those internal organs. That's called viscera. So for all of us wanting to ascend to the fifth dimension, there is no such thing as only ascending, because our bodies established the ascended to the assimilation pole at the same time it descended to the impansion pit. Our brain ascends at the same time our viscera descends. The descent of the viscera is closely coupled to the developmental of the diaphragm. So during the growth expansion of the chest, the ribs become tilted inferiorly as a result of the descent of the viscera, and they become disengaged from the vertebral column by growth fracturing. This fracturing leads to the development of joints between the vertebrae and ribs.
Okay.
So, if you didn't know, your ribs are attached to your spine, your vertebrae, and your sternum by cartilage. They're not directly fused. Right? So, that happens by growth fracturing. Which is interesting that they use fracturing to get oil out of Mother Earth. So, strictly speaking, it's incorrect to talk of the first inspiration being after birth, because breathing movements by which air is sucked into and expelled from the lungs are an absolutely late consequence of the most complicated processes that were established and regulated long before birth.
Right.
So what are the two characteristics most typical of us humans? We've just skimmed over the last few weeks. We've gone past the fetus now, past the embryo into the fetus, and now we're looking at being birthed, right? So what is the two characteristics most typical of us humans? Well, our speech and our upright gait, right? Both involve a unique pattern of behavior, and each is preconditioned by our unique human ontogeny. And both are typical behavioral manifestations of human cerebralization. growing the cerebrum, right, growing the brain. Although we still don't understand how human psychological behavior is related to the physiological activity of the brain. Let me repeat that. We still don't understand how our human psychological behavior is related to the physiological activity of our brain.
And
we can be certain.
And everybody would.
That's known.
That's known.
Yeah, it's not. And that's the case for the mind not being in the brain, the difference between the mind versus the brain.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we've been figuring that out.
Yeah, we've been figuring that out.
So, but in all this unknowingness, we can be certain of one fact. And that fact is that the ontogeny of the embryo is a prelude for all subsequent human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not in the embryo, we're not going to do it.
Okay.
Both speech and our upright gait are the result of the specifically human ontogenic process. And so we should not attempt to interpret them as an evolutionary modification of the behavior of our ancestors.
Right.
So here's a satire poem written by a biologist a long time ago, and his work's not translated into English. So, but in order to fashion a human being, nature simply had to chase the monkey right away from the jungle tree, because once driven onto the plains, the monkey had no other option for the monkey remained other than to become a human.
Mm-hmm.
Satire, right?
Yeah, that's the old story.
So,
that's the old story, right?
It dawned on the monkey from that hour forth that it had been driven away from the jungle onto the plains. It dawned on the monkey that there were no bananas at his mouth. So he must, if he wanted his life to extend, erect his body on two hind legs, leaving both hands free to pick at fruits and do other things.
Mm-hmm.
The hands outstretching, pairs to obtain, causes growth within his brain from year to year, new grooves unfolds until the skull swells to its limit, 1,000 grams contained within it. I just laughed when I read that. That's hilarious. That just totally does, that satire right there destroys evolution. Yeah, nature had no choice but to drive a monkey from his tree, where he was like, oh shit, there's no bananas, so now I need to stand upright and use my hands to pick fruit, and while I eat, my brain develops.
Yeah. That's a story. And so
I've heard that.
We started eating meat, and that's why our brains fall.
No.
In this
mainstream evolution.
Yeah. Nope, it's all biological. It's all dynamic force fields. So a striking characteristic of our upright gait is the architecture of our skeleton. Morphological, the forming fields comparison of human and animal skeletons have shown that in human adults, the lower portion of our pelvis is inclined to about 30 degrees relative to the frontal plane of the upper pelvis. So I don't quite understand that, but so our adult pelvis has a specific bend in it.
Mm-hmm.
The transverse axis of this bend passes through the hip joints. So in humans, most of the mobile portion of the vertebral column is located vertically over the hip joint. This anatomy is totally different from that which is found in quadrupeds and is essential for our upright gait. So we could not have descended from the monkeys. We could not have morphed from the monkeys, right? Because our upright, it's just different. And as I've been saying, our embryo will always give rise, a fertilized ovum will always give rise to a human, not a monkey. A monkey's fertilized ovum will always give rise to a monkey, not a human.
Right. So if this was right, that entire story. If we were to go back into the and just try to live like the monkeys, go back into the
No, we'd remain human.
Right.
That's why I made that comment about shape shifting, because yes, if you put enough energy into it and focus and focus and focus and work up enough energy, you can shift your body for about 30 seconds or however long the shamans were able to do this into the form of a monkey, but you're automatically going to come back to human because your morphogenic fields will not hold you in the form of a monkey.
Yeah.
Because you're human.
Right.
Right.
So, in human cerebralization, the growing forebrain is a substantial sink for nutrients, and this sink provokes the development of a massive heart to supply the brain. The size of the embryonic heart demands a powerful peripheral circulation of blood, and this in turn enables an intensive growth of the liver. So did you just hear that reciprocity right there? Right? The growth of the heart is usually correlated with the growth of the liver, and the liver is always fixed to the inferior surface of the central tendon of the diaphragm. As our embryo grows, the heart, liver mass, and the brain move apart. So again, the descending and the ascending function in one movement. So the entire visceral tract accompanies the descent of the more dominant heart liver mass. And relative to the diaphragm, the brain and spinal cord are ascending while the heart and liver mass are descending. So we can't just ascend somewhere. To all those who are wishing to ascend to the fifth dimension, you're not just ascending. There's no place to go. But that's an impossible move because it doesn't even happen in our embryo. So again, the emergence of our upright gait is a result of cerebralization and of the entire ontogenic process. Other animals do not manifest a similar dominance of brain development, and so therefore do not develop the upright gait. The early ontogeny of our brain is decisive in laying the foundations for all subsequent patterns of human behavior. And the conventional views is that the hemispheres of our cerebrum grow symmetrically, but the accurate and complete view is that each hemisphere grows in reciprocal harmony with the other as follows. So the volume of one hemisphere increases, which pushes this other hemisphere against the side of the brain of the skull while this one is growing, and then this one stops and this one starts growing and pushes that one. So this one gets bigger, and then this one has a chance to get bigger, and then it's reciprocity. They don't just grow together.
So we push each other.
Push each other to grow.
Yeah. It's that whole ascending and descending process at the same time. Only this time it's going side to side, right, instead of up and down. So long before birth, our two hemispheres are mutually influencing each other and so represent a functional whole. So alternating and reciprocal growth process ushers in the reciprocal transmission of nerve impulses from one hemisphere to another. So when we say we're tossing a problem back and forth, we are applying a psychosomatic description to the oscillation activity of our brain.
Okay.
An intuitive appreciation of the decisive role of the brain in every sphere of human activity has existed from the earliest times, even though the precise relationship between the brain and the head and between the brain and face was quite unknown. So now we're able to detect varying relationships between the surface area of our human embryo and its volume quite early in the development of every different kind of embryo. But in the human, ontogenic development can lead to more rounded bodies with a smaller surface area relative to body volume, or tall and slender bodies with more surface area relative to body volume. So this innate somatotype is the result of prenatal ontogeny, and it cannot be varied at will, and is therefore of great importance for the constitution of the body as a whole and for individual behavior. But in contrast to this forming of our form, right? We have arbitrary fluctuating and short-lived changes in body proportions that we call gestures. So, for example, when we move our head slowly from side to side, we can sense that it can be easily set in motion. If we incline our head just as easily, we know that we can incline our head from one side to the other just as easily. So, as a work tool, our head can be used for transmitting the message. Well, it could be like this, or it could be like this. As an instrument of communication, the position of the head is saying, look here, things are still a bit uncertain. The matter is still in doubt. I am of two minds about it. So then any person who has a body like the one making the gestures, by imitating the gesture, can put themselves into a state of uncertainty and perceive the thoughts of the correspondent. So if I'm indecisive and I'm going, and you imitate my movement, you're going to come into the same state of indecisiveness that I am.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're getting into behavior.
Yeah, a little bit. The early development of such body language is a prerequisite for every act of communication, and so the acquisition of all knowledge. So how limited would our experiences be if we could not use our bodies for communication? And by means of gestures, we are constantly reshaping our own body. So in so doing, we are then able to use our body to decode the gestures of others. Mm-hmm. And if we could not use our body as an instrument comprehensible to ourselves, there would be no self-understanding of gestures, and gestures would then be incomprehensible.
So the body else.
Yeah.
The body shapes your reality.
Yes. Absolutely.
In the world.
Yeah. So now, as a gesture, if we shrug our shoulders, when you shrug your shoulders, you're putting your body in a particular configuration so that your shoulder joints no longer permit your arms to be used freely for handling. So think about it. You can't shrug your shoulders and lift your arm at the same time. You can't effectively. You can hold them, and it doesn't really work to hold them in a state of shrugging and try to pick it up. So after anyone repeating this gesture under similar conditions will immediately experience the feeling, it can't be done, it's impossible, I don't have a clue, because that's when we shrug our shoulders. We're like, right? I don't know, I can't handle it. So anyone following would, if they were in tune enough and sensitive enough, would pick up that feeling. The problem is we're not that in tune with our own bodies. So when we rejoice to see our babies barely able to stand, reaching out to touch objects, wanting to grasp everything, then we can begin to suspect that without continual bodily handling, the capacity for mental grasping would never develop. It is only after we have used our hands to grasp movable things objectively that we're able to grasp ideas in an intellectual sense. So the fact that children born without limbs can acquire the same mental skills doesn't disprove this argument that we learn mental skills through somatic gestures. And there's no more, I have no more on that subject.
Because the morphic fields would be the limbs.
Well, yeah, I didn't think about that. The morphic fields are still there for the limbs, even if the kid is born without limbs. The morphic fields are still there. Right? You're right. That's it.
I would think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Without an innate awareness of our living bodily process, expanded levels of human endeavors involving vocational differentiation and more complex cultural development could never be attained. If we were incapable of making gestures with our bodies, there would be no language. No use of language for thinking, and no social order would have developed. What we call sociology is based on the ontogenic development of a sociology of cells and cellular ensembles. In addition to intellectual activity, our somatic development prepares us for emotional or affective impulses. So somatic development is the basis for our capacity to communicate our thoughts and feelings. So a person who is laughing is somatically different than someone who is not laughing. The person who is reflecting deeply on something is, in their metabolism, physically tuned differently and altered in comparison to one who is talking and singing. So all gestures we make are gestures of the body. And our human being develops its embryonic performances in a way that is unique to its own ontogeny. That is why I said you shapeshift. It takes a lot of energy, but you will never maintain the form that you're shapeshifting into. Right. It is impossible to comprehend the principles of human behavior patterns by studying only the similarity of human behavior to animal behavior. It's now possible to prove that all patterns of behavior have embryonic developmental processes as their precursors. So what we call instincts are the direct consequences of prenatal developmental events, which are really the prenatal performances of the embryo. So whatever is not already subconsciously initiated and practiced by the body during its early development cannot be enacted, either instinctively or consciously at any later date. So there is nothing we humans can do that was not already, our embryo was not already capable of. That is why we are not a higher form of development than our embryo or our ovum.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Well, you can say it the other way.
You can say it the other way.
We would have more
embryo
fixated or more
hard.
Well, there's a develop. I use this. I'm treading gently. Well, but we have to understand that whatever we do is already there in our fertilized ovum.
And you can, I would say they're not just there in the field of what a human is.
Well, yeah, it's not just in the ovum, it's in the fields. Exactly. It's in that cosmic web, multi-layered web that creates these fields that form us. And we can get into a whole other line of conversation here. But for example, if the lips of the young embryo had never rolled in as part of an early growth development, then the newborn child would never be able to suck instinctively or consciously. Right? So congenital instincts are the...
What I'm getting here is a lot of our behaviors of our biology.
Yes.
Learned things, but rather the nature of the biology itself.
Yes, they are, exactly. That's why I kept emphasizing that we can't use, and he did, Eric Gleckschmidt, that we can't use evolution in describing development because we're not evolving ever to a higher form.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, all of our congenital instincts are the elaborated reactions of processes that the embryo has already initiated. And that's the end. We could talk more about gestures, but I didn't want to get into all that.
No, this is a lot. This is something that has to sit on you for a while, and I invite anyone that has to do what I do. I can't go out and walk and take a bus and not hours about this, and how there's just another way to about life that is not interesting part. There's like this fake morphic field, right? There's this what everybody thinks life is, and how life works. And that's pretty real. I mean, it is kind of a web, like a matrix, right? There's a fake matrix and everybody's in that information field. But it's funny how at the same time they can be in the real field. People can't be outside of the real field. Stop being life, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's really weird.
It's really weird. Yeah. We're
so into you realize this, and then back into the real field, and you figure everybody's just. It's pretty lonely here. Everybody else is thinking. And when are we going to continue? And I wouldn't want to think of this is starting to change for me. It's a lineal growth kind of expansive mindset. When are we just going to come back to life? We're not alive.
That's exactly where we're going next week. We're going to talk about holding space and standing like a giraffe to say no, no more, right? And holding this space, which will lead to the renunciations we have on our website, which is really important given that, and I'm going to be expanding that list more and more, but this talk is really important with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction we had last year, and we have this year upcoming a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And Uranus, we were able to find the planet Uranus when we said we have no need for stinking king anymore. So Uranus represents our liberation, our rebellion. So this is why it's really, that's why we're going to talk about this, is this concept of holding a space of no, I'm not going to do that anymore, while we're standing tall as our giraffe saying no.
Wow, this is so important.
Yeah.
And
so just for one instant, and we'll get into this more. I get emails routinely from an astrologist I follow that is into the human design movement, just simply because there are some wise things he said. But an email I got this week, he said, victim consciousness is leaving this planet. And that is absolutely faulty, incorrect, inaccurate information, because victim, as long as we have religions that worship a man on a cross and glorify his suffering, dying for us, victim consciousness cannot leave this planet. You have to say no. No. I'm not going to be a victim. No, I'm not going to worship a dying man on a cross for myself, because there's no need. I'm not a victim.
Right. Yeah, this is important. This is important that you say this. In all these astrology, the way I think it now is way broader than we will. Things go
lower way, like.
So there's all these things. I mean, you would say there's a prevent, the victim is leaving, but then it's up to you. I mean, we still have free will.
But it's not leaving humanity. That's solipsism, saying that's
exactly.
Right? That's solipsism, saying I can just hang out on my floaty drinking margaritas all day in the pool because victim consciousness is leaving this planet and it's all going to be great. It's the same thing as the born-again Christians who believe they're going to be raptured to heaven while they're busy every day fucking up our planet. It's solipsism.
Right. And that's that. You get all these opportunities and cosmic conjunction and things, but if you don't do it, you don't do the work, nothing's going to be done.
Nothing's going to be done for you.
Exactly.
You're not in the. That's where I would say that. The matrix of life has and it's telling us and pushing us, wanting us to become more alive and to stop and still grow from bad things in the past. But not because people are still in the other matrix made to keep them stuck where they are.
Yeah.
So if they don't change everything in their matrix, they're not going to get anywhere.
Right. Well, and the good part about all these astrologists and spiritual gurus who teach this is, remember in our first talk of the ontogenic basis of you, I talked about loosening tissue. Every tissue of growth has been loosened. So they're doing the loosening work in the consciousness for us, so we can actually guide us into aloha. I need that living.
Right. And they're to a point helping out. I would say. I see that there's no like you can't go. I mean, you should go up. Instead of going down. But in a way, I mean, the system is not going to fix itself. It's continue getting shittier and shittier.
Yeah. Well,
and that helps if you're willing to get out of that.
Well, and that's why we're having this talk next week, because it's as simple as holding this space, standing tall like a giraffe and saying no. And that's what we'll get into next week. It's nothing major. It's every little change.
Yeah, you're going to tell us.
Give us
what things we can get in our mind right now. That are take us next actions and a real change and a real liberation, which is I now see no different liberation and spiritual growth. They're kind of the same thing.
They are, absolutely.
So that's amazing. Ingrid for all. Is that are we gonna have today?
Yeah, that's it for today. We're at 6:56 anyway, so
awesome.
That's good.
Awesome. So let me invite everyone for next week. 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. Do you know what it's going to be called? Standing tall or
standing tall like a giraffe.
Standing tall. You'll probably come up better in a few minutes.
Maybe so, but
because they renunciations. I like that.
I like that.
And if you don't know what, standing tall like a giraffe, you're saying that then. But we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. For right now, it's standing tall like a giraffe and holding sacred space. I know that because there's a lot to that. I don't know. Right now, there's that song.
Now they know what
Western song by Aaron Tippin that says you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. So, standing tall like a giraffe for.
I like that. I'm gonna find that.
I'm gonna find that.
Use it as the sign, maybe.
Aaron Tippin sings it. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything.
Wow,
yeah.
I'm gonna use that.
So,
you know what the topic is.
You know what the topic is.
The time is. Please support our channels. And sharing. And if you want to get involved with us, visit Alohan Aini with one A. And we'll be there with you next week.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you, Ingrid, and thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and on that note, we'll end the live